Alright, what's going on, guys? I'm just going to make a quick tutorial about the method I use to make a new object, or just to add a mesh collider to an object that doesn't have one. So I have DevX Unity open here. This is a fresh install of pipe, so there's not going to be any mess in here. You want to open up the scenes and then find scenes/pipe.unity. That's the main level here. And the object that I used before was the adventure sign, which is this cube here with no number at the end. So in order to get a mesh collider, we need to borrow it from another object. I'm going to take it from this box jump test right here. If you open up the tree, you'll find the mesh collider here. We need to get this path ID, so it's in level 3, path ID 4578. So I already have it sitting right here. I'm going to dump that. Okay, now I'm going to edit this with Notepad++. Okay, so this little section right here is what tells the mesh collider which object the mesh collider is going to bind to, or which it's a child of, basically. So right now it is a child of box jump test, which is 495. We need to go down to the cube here and find the path ID, and then just change this to 1586. And then down here is what tells it which mesh to use for the collision. So again, it's using this boxjump.obj, which is path ID 70, and we want it to use the cube.obj that's in the mesh filter. So I'm going to go find this path ID. You'll notice here that the file ID is 0, but if you put 0 in here, it actually won't work. I figured out that this is actually 5 is the file ID for some reason. So that's a little bit confusing. But I'm going to change these numbers. 10202, and then I'm going to go ahead and save that. And then I come back in here. You're going to copy this type and then go ahead and add a new asset. Paste the type here. It's automatically going to assign it an ID. The file ID is fine as 0, and you don't need to touch this mono class ID either. Leave this box checked. So now that'll be at the very top. I'm going to import that dump that we just did. And then there's one more thing I believe we have to do. So the cube game object has a list of components, and so we need to add our new collider to that list. So I need to make a dump of this path ID 1586. Alright, I'll go ahead and open that up, and then just add another one of these components into the array. Change this to a 3, and then change this to a 4. And then we need to change it to the new asset that we added, so this 17001. We just need to change that here. We'll save that. And now this one just overwrites the old cube game object. I will save that. Put that back in the pipe data. And then I'll redrag this into DevX so that I can get an updated tree just to make sure everything is working like it should. As long as my computer doesn't freeze. Alright, so again, we'll open up the scenes, go back to scenes./pipe.unity. And now if we go down to our cube, we have a mesh collider. You'll see here it's using the cube.obj. So now if you're just wanting to use one mesh for your entire park or whatever, you'd be good to stop here. The cube is located in the resources here in Unity default resources, as most of you probably know by now. But if you want to make an entirely new object, we have to make a dump of every single one of these assets here. So the cube and all of the children assets to that cube. So the mesh collider, we'll have to make a new cube.obj, mesh filter, mesh renderer, the material that goes with it. I mean, you can use the same material if you want, but if you just want entirely new thing to work with, then we'll do that. So let's start. We already have the dump of the cube. Go back in here. Now let's make a dump of this mesh collider that we just created. So most of the stuff is going to be in your level 3. It's always best just to double check here. And I'll just call this new object. Okay, now we need this mesh filter. It's at 4412. This stuff is still pretty confusing to me. I find it's best to have a notebook and kind of write kind of a pseudo code type tree, if you will, just to kind of keep yourself organized. And again, I'll just rename it new object. $3780. And 3022. And make sure it has the correct type when you're doing this, because a lot of them have, the same number. And then I won't do the material. I mean, it's the same basic thing, but just for the sake of time, we'll do these. Okay. So this is kind of the confusing part, to try to figure out what order you're going to do things. I'm going to start by creating a new game object. So let me go to this 1586, or I mean, I can just use any of these that have a game object and copy. So let me go add. Again, paste that in the type. It's going to give us a path ID of 17002. Leave everything else the same. And now we will go up, we'll import. Let me rename this real quick, just so things are a little less confusing. Okay, so since we have our game object new ID, we can kind of figure out what the rest of them are going to be. So we'll just go in order here. The mesh collider is going to be 17003. The mesh filter is going to be 17004. Mesh renderer is going to be 17005, and 17006 for the transform. So we can kind of pre-name those just so we don't get confused. So the mesh collider, mesh filter, mesh renderer, and the transform. Okay, and then in our game object dump, we need to change these numbers to reflect these new ones as well. So we'll see what they were called, basically. So the mesh collider, it was using 17001. We're going to change that to a 3 because we just made the mesh collider 17003. Our mesh filter was 4412, so we're going to change that to 17004. Mesh renderer was 3780, so we'll change that to 17005. Transform was 3022, and we'll change it to 17006. Now we shouldn't have to mess with this game object file now if I just import that here. I'm just going to save this. I like to periodically save it through this process so that, you know, I don't have the type here. It will show up with the correct types and things, and then I can kind of double check everything in DevX as I'm going along. So here's the beginning of our new object. It's still called cube, which actually I could change that here with the string name. We could just call it new object. Sorry, I should have done that before I imported it there. The good thing about making all these new files is that they kind of sit right on top of everything, you know, if you just do it by path ID. Whatever, that's not that important. So in every one of our other files, we basically want to change its parent object to our 17002, which is our new game object. And then here, the mesh that the collider references, we don't have yet because we haven't made it. So I'm going to leave that for now. You can actually make that. I can go into the resources. You have to make it in the same asset bundle, basically, that the original one was in. So here we see it's in Unity default resources. I tried doing it the other way, and I kept getting errors, and it was all sorts of messy. So we'll take this cube, we'll do a dump. Call this new object. And we shouldn't really need anything else. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. I'm going to copy the type here, so it's a mesh. We'll add a new one. And you'll notice it's the path ID 17001. That's because this is a new asset bundle. Let me import the dump that we just edited. So now 5, this is how I found out that I was talking about earlier in that other file, that the file ID is 5 because these are in the same asset bundle. So I'll just change this here to the 17001 that we just made. I'll save that. The mesh collider should be good to go now. So we'll move on to the mesh filter. Again, we just need to change these, so 17002, and this one is 17001 and 5. That's again referencing that new object we made, or that new mesh we made, I should say. The mesh renderer 17002. Here's where, if you wanted to change the material, you could. Right now it's pointing us to the adventure sign material, but you could just find a path ID of whatever. So 3, I think, is the file ID for shared assets 2. So if you find a material in shared assets 2, you can just change whatever path ID here. So just this one spot, and it'll change the material. A lot easier than just dumping and re-importing. So we should be good with this one, and we'll change our transform. So with the transform, I like to zero out the location. I did mess around a little bit with zeroing out the rotation, but it just made a mess of the game for whatever reason. It broke the physics. I have been somewhat successful in taking a transform from a different object and kind of replacing it, one that doesn't have any rotation on it, and that seems to work so far. But you can use kind of these same methods to figure that out on your own. Let me change the parent object, 17002. And I will save that. And I think we should be good to go to start importing again. So now we check our original numbers here. Let's open up our level 3. First one is using that mesh collider that we had added in the very beginning. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to add. So this is going to be our new mesh collider. I'm going to import the mesh collider over the top of it. And next we have a mesh filter. So we need to find one. I could use this one here. So if I get close to that number, some should show up. So here's a mesh filter. We can copy the type. I'm going to add. And then import our new mesh filter. Now we have a mesh renderer, 3780. I copy that. And always remember to check your file ID here. Sometimes they are different and it'll catch you off guard, and then you'll spend forever trying to figure out what went wrong. Let's import our mesh renderer. And finally our transform. And we'll import our transform. And now if my organization skills, hold on, I need to save. Okay. If my organization skills were good enough, then we should be done. So let me just drag this back in to DevX and we'll check our type tree. I think the recording software is slowing this down because it's never taken this long to load. Okay, so now we have 2 cubes here. This is the original cube, I believe. And then the one below it is our new object, which is essentially just a clone of it. And now when you want to change this one, you just go into the resources, Unity default resources, and you just change the new object.obj that we made. And that's it.